Everyone could take their seats, please. I don't have the authority to call the House to order, but I was told, and I'm going to need Rebecca up here with me, so. Yeah, oh, go ahead. I was just asking, could I do that?
If we can get the tribal leaders in the front, we could do a picture right now, or we could wait and do that after. I think people are filtering up. Why don't we do the question and answer part now? My understanding, there's a pretty fat stack of questions, and Rebecca and Tad are going to go through those. I think they may be sorted out and organize some of the most frequently asked questions. So we'll do 30 minutes of that, and then we'll have the tribal leaders come on up.
Let's start. Yeah, you'll go first. All right, welcome back, everybody. I just want to introduce Ed Fairbanks, who is currently the acting executive director of the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. He's going to help us with some of the questions. And Mr. Levi Brown, they're both enrolled with Leech Lake, by the way. And Levi is currently the tribal liaison for MnDOT. So I did want to correct a couple things that first of all, there's a photograph that says it's President Roosevelt in the book. There's a photograph in the book that says it's President Roosevelt. It's actually Harold Ickes. Representative Murphy was kind enough to point that out to me, an old friend. It's Harold Ickes and then John Collier standing in back of him, correct? And my friend Ed pointed out to me that we did not mention the Indian Child Welfare Act, which passed in 1978. It's among the 5,000 other things we did not mention in our presentation. So I'm going to allow, actually, Rebecca will take the first couple questions, and then, as I understand it, we're going to have the representatives who ask them actually ask the questions. So you could just tell what they're about.
Yeah. Okay, do we know who asked them?
That's, actually, we don't know who asked this one.
Okay.
It's something like the rich tribes and the poor tribes. Who's that?
Should I just roll with it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just got my piece of paper here that has a couple of questions on it. So one of the questions is, why don't rich tribes help poor tribes? I think whoever asked this question probably doesn't know a lot about Indian country and how we all help each other out. Shakopee is one of the more fortunate tribes in Minnesota, and it's part of our Dakota tradition to help others that are less fortunate. We've got I think over $360 million we've donated to tribes, organizations that support Indian country, and our neighbors for a variety of programs over the past 20 years. We also have a loan program that helps tribes trying to get some economic development going on their reservation. We've helped fund hospitals and clinics in Indian country and casinos as far as and sustainable green projects. Our portfolio of loans really spans a huge span of enterprises for Indian country. So I think to answer the question simply, the rich tribes do help the poor tribes. Okay. The second question I have is, do you have renewable energy projects, and is climate change a topic of discussion in the Native community? I think climate change is definitely a topic of discussion in Native communities. Actually, I was just at the National Congress of American Indians winter session last month, and that was one of the main topics. Some tribes in Alaska and on the coasts are facing climate change impacts that we're not seeing here in Minnesota, but I think wild rice is a perfect example of climate change and the threat to original food in this area. Because of pollution and climate change, our wild rice is threatened. In my community specifically, we work to protect our watersheds by planting prairies and restoring natural habitats within our community. We work with the local jurisdictions to reduce the salt that ends up in our waterways. We've got solar energy, we've got geothermal energy, we've got green roofs. So knowing that our communities are going to be here forever, climate change and renewable energy and being a good steward of the earth is something that is very important to our communities.
Miigwech, Rebecca. Representative Detmer has a question on veterans. And I've got the Secretary Treasurer of White Earth to respond. Mr. Alan Roy.
Well, thank you. And we did speak in the back, but the American Indian Services in the United States military, as a lot of people don't realize that, please comment on why, if you look at our brothers from the tribes, have served at a higher rate per capita than any other group of Americans. Could you maybe brief us on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I'm Alan Roy. I'm the Secretary Treasurer in White Earth Nation. I'm also a veteran of the United States Army. I am also a reservist. I'm a captain in the United States Army Reserve. I'm with the Civil Affairs Unit, 407th, out of Arden Hills, Minnesota. And I have about over 10 years of service currently. Before coming to this position, I actually worked with DEED, right? I was a Disabled Veteran Outreach Program, and I was exposed to a lot of the statistics behind that. You reference, it is true, Native Americans have the highest per capita service rate among all racial and ethnic category groups in the United States. The Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs estimates that up to 25% of Native Americans serve at some point in the U.S. Armed Forces. Also, I would add that part of the reasons why it ranges. It ranges. For me personally, because that's all I can speak for, is for me, I have a heritage of service. Both my grandfathers served in the Army, and I believe they had some of my uncles also served in the Army. And so I think there's the same question that's being asked of Native Americans could also be asked of the general population. And I say that because as we can see, we have a all-volunteer force currently. And I believe less than 1% of the U.S. population has served or currently serves in the U.S. Armed Forces. And I think they were saying up to 3% are veterans in the United States. And so what we've found over the years is that service is an honor, but it's also, you're starting to see these lineages that are starting to set up fathers serve, or mothers serve, and their children serve, and their children serve. And so it's a complicated question, but for me, it was an honor, and it still is.
Well, thank you. And just to follow up on that, I've done some research myself, and those are the same reasons that all of us serve, as I'm a veteran also. But if you take a look at the United States Department of Defense, as of 2012, there are over 22,000 American Indians, Alaska Natives on active duty currently. And in 2010, the census identified 150,000 American Indians and Alaskan Natives were serving, were veterans. 27 Native Americans have been awarded the Medal of Honor. Mm-hmm. So thank you for your service.
And thank you for your service to Representative Detmer. Miigwech.
Thanks, Alan. So we had a question on Red Lake, why Red Lake is different, which Levi Brown is going to answer. I think that was Representative Lesh, I want to say. Is that? Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Please explain the process by which Red Lake has a different jurisdiction and ownership over their land and how that relates to Minnesota law.
So first off, my Niji sit right in front of you, Sam Strong, the secretary from Red Lake. And I'm reminded all the time of how prideful they are of that they were not part of the General Dawes Act. And that allotment in turn of the century, that act where a lot of the lands were cut up, Red Lake retains almost 100% of their lands intact, congregated. So their lands are all held intact, held in common by their tribal government. And at the same time, when Public Law 280 came around, was enacted in the 50s, they were not part of that. So they are a closed reservation within Minnesota, and I think that's the great thing about Minnesota. We have a diverse array of tribes from southern Minnesota, northern Minnesota, but I know that the Red Lake Nation is very proud of that aspect. And so it's a great question. Oh, so you want me to ask the question? So I took a picture of my questions that were asked. So this is from Representative McDonald. And the question says, did you want to read your question?
Bonjour, and thank you for today. Question, see, I had two, but you said just one, so I'll read my one. My son turned 18 this last year, and the first thing he wanted to do was to go to gamble and play a little poker in Shakopee. So my question is this: is the youth today in general associate our Indian nation with gambling and the casinos? That is both fortunate and unfortunate in both ways. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's a pretty broad question, but there's social dynamics both in tribal communities and non-tribal communities. Even a lot of our tribal communities, you see pushback from the young people who want to get back to natural resource gathering, natural resource use, and then changing that dynamic of how our communities are made. I watched Prairie Island has a lot of natural resource activities that they're doing with their youth. Go all the way up to Red Lake, their immersion school, and how they talk about their culture. And so even on the tribal side, we're trying to be more with our own communities, trying to ensure that they are viewing themselves and getting back to those cultural ties. And I think the other aspect of that is, how do we educate youth outside of Indian country? How do we tell this story that we're all talking about here, so it isn't just about casinos and this thing, that there is a rich cultural diversity that the state of Minnesota has, and that the tribes, all have, all distinct. And so I think it's something that this discussion that we're having today is a first step towards addressing and talking about that. Yeah, okay. And then Representative Olson from St. Louis County, your question? Yep.
Sure, thank you. My question was about the Tribal Historic Preservation Office and just speaking a little bit more to the role of that office. And I'm from the district that has Highway 23 and the project that happened there, and how the role of the work of this office and how it can be helpful in preventing things like that from happening.
So MnDOT has been focusing a lot of outreach on district level interaction with tribal governments, road staff, TIPO staff, making sure that everybody's seeing the same message. And we're also making sure our data that we pay for, as taxpayers pay for, and everything goes, is used in the best way. Meaning that if any of us want to go look online at the capital improvements plan or the STIP, which is the long-term 10-year plan that MnDOT has, well, guess what? We're now sharing that with tribes. And that's something that was always online for public, people can see it. But now we're starting to use these tools to make sure that, tribal leadership, including TIPOs, are able to access that. So when we have meetings, we can have real meaningful discussion and dialogue about projects that are coming up. And this cannot be stressed any more than when you get to the southern part through the river valleys, where maybe they're not on reservation, but our projects, MnDOT projects, are going across river valleys and some of these areas that are, distinct to the Dakota people. But I'm going to let Ed talk about MIAC's role in that question. Goch.
Adin Bonjour, Ed Fairbanks. I am the interim executive director of Indian Affairs. These great leaders of our tribal nations asked me to serve in that capacity as I was sliding out of the state, getting ready to retire. So I'm back in. Specifically, Highway 23 was a disaster of federal versus non-federal funding. If we had had 1 penny of federal funding on Highway 23, the federal 106 laws would have applied. And then you would have had a greater understanding of the entire site versus a postage stamp that the Corps of Engineers studied. Now with MnDOT, we're working diligently to try and have a process that affects all state-funded roads, 100% state-funded roads, that would have 106-like procedures until we have an opportunity to come to this body and talk to you about changes in law that will protect those sites forever and ever. Specifically, though, you will find that in Indian Affairs, there are 2 people. Indian Affairs is 5 people. We have 2 that do culture resources. Right now, Minnesota Department of Transportation gives them about 1,000 permits a year to review. Add to that, we're estimating about 600 additional 100% state-funded permits. And so what you have is basically an unfunded mandate, this huge volume of work following on 2 people that not only have to review those permits, but also have to go in Indian country and deal with these uncoveries as it continuously occurs. Now, we've been working with the Indian Affairs since this site, and their staff have been up, well, no, my staff, I'm sorry, have to change hats. My staff have been up there pretty much 100% of their time. And so we will be coming and asking for resources to this body to help us adjust that so that we have adequate staff, as well as our partner Office of State Archaeologists. In that fact, when we come back and ask you for change in the laws that helps 100% state-funded projects, we hope to reduce these. We'll never eliminate them, but we're desperately going to try to reduce them. And thank you for that question. This has been the most unbelievable, emotional thing I've been involved in my 43 years of service to the state and the feds. And we will try to get it right. So thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Representative Kunesh-Podein. Do you mind providing it for us, please? And I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did a fabulous job, thank you. My question, I'm of Native descent myself from the Lakota Sioux, and a lot of people will ask me like, well, how much are you, or what is your quantum? And I wonder if there's anybody here that would like to explain the history behind quantum and why we Native folks are the only one that the only group of people that have to prove that they are of Native blood. Thank you.
So, yeah, there's a couple of groups that have to show their pedigree, prize-winning animals and American Indians. But the blood quantum idea was not an Indian idea. That was strictly a product of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. For example, to be a member of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, you have to be 1/4 blood quantum Minnesota Chippewa tribe blood. The question why, probably you have to think like the federal government, which puts you in an awkward situation. But so they have to figure out how to divide up Indian Health Service monies, how to divide up BIA monies. And so when Felix Cohen was writing up what the definition of an Indian is, and this is pretty much federal law as we see it, you have to be have some Indian blood, be a descendant of a tribe at the very least, and be considered by a federally recognized tribe as a member of the tribe. Now, blood quantum can differ from tribe to tribe. So one of the fundamental powers of being an Indian tribe is the ability to determine membership. So if your tribe decides, they're going to have a 1/4 blood quantum cutoff for who gets services, they can do that. But if they want to, many tribes throughout the country have gone to a system called lineal descendancy, where if you can find an ancestor on the rolls from one of the rolls that the tribe may pick from the 19th century or the early 20th century, you can be a member of the tribe, but you have to be have a membership card and be recognized by the tribe as a member of the tribal community. So, but why can there be different blood quantums, you might be thinking? It's because being an Indian, as somebody said earlier, is not a racial classification. So in 1974, after all the Civil Rights Acts passed in the 60s, somebody sued who wanted to work at the BIA. It was, of course, a case called Morton versus Mancarry. And they said, and under the Indian Reorganization Act, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had Indian preference hiring. And that goes up to the Supreme Court. And Thurgood Marshall, kind of an authority on civil rights, does the decision. And basically it says, he said, so you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, but being an Indian is not a racial classification. It is a political classification. So if you're 164th Cherokee, you can still be a Cherokee person and a member of an Indian tribe just as much as a full-blooded Navajo is. So the whole question of blood quantum, some theorize that it's termination by fractions. As I said, the tribal people did not develop it; the Bureau did. So it's a bit of history we're left with, and we're going to have to deal with, because now our blood quantum is getting less and less as the generations go by, and then there'll be the issue of who gets health services, who gets other types of services. So, and let's see, Representative, yes. Oh, yes. Levi was pointing out, and Ed and Levi and I all are members of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. They're going through some constitutional reforms, so that's being actively discussed. So I've got two last questions. One's from Representative Erickson, Sandra Erickson. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
This is the one on funding. I think you asked two. So.
I did.
Yeah.
But I'd like the other one answered too. So how do lawmakers know that funding provided to tribes will have accountability measures that ensure the funding results in positive results? Is data provided? Because in my calls to various agencies, I've not been able to get answers to my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to have Ed. I was going to call you. Fairbanks.
Thank you. Again, Edward Fairbanks. Before I worked for the MnDOT, I started my career with the Leech Lake Reservation, DNR. We took a great deal of funding from the state, and we had reports and such that we had to do. But more applicable to this conversation is my time with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. 24 years as a tribal liaison. I also served as a contract representative for the Bureau of Indian Affairs for 6 years. When tribes accept funds, they accept the requirements of reporting. Now, if there are differences in how the reporting comes, and the tribe can negotiate with the funding agency, but every dollar that's spent on a tribe has got to be accounted for to that agency. So US EPA, we literally had to know how many paper clips you were buying. It was unbelievably difficult. But that is the process that we had to do. In the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I had to have progress reports. So like Tad was not very good at giving me his progress reports. But other than Tad, we had a great deal of money out there where the tribes would give us the data that we needed to just justify additional funding, to justify the services that were provided, the number of hunting and fishing court cases that we had to do, et cetera, and et cetera. So same thing at MnDOT. When we give state monies to tribes, the tribes must report back to us in the same way, in the same manner as anybody else that accepts those dollars. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
And sorry, we didn't get to your second one. Maybe we can talk later. We're pretty much out of time. But the question was, the person who wrote it didn't sign it, but if you want to identify yourself, it was about the future. It was the only one that said future as the topic. What can we as a state do to work towards ameliorating the injustices inflicted upon Native peoples? Did anyone ask that question? Yes. Can you read your whole question, sir? And I think we've got the tribal leaders panel, and maybe I'll let them respond to that. So if you could.
Yes, thank you, and thank you everyone for the presentations today. My question pertains to how we as a state and as a state legislature can be proactive in ameliorating the historic injustices inflicted upon the tribal nations and indigenous peoples of this state, and how we, moving forward, can be effective and active partners in helping to be part of the future.
Thank you. I think that's a great question to end on, and I think we've got the group that is best equipped to answer it coming up. So we'll do the tribal leaders panel next. And anyway, if you could give this panel of folks a round of, yeah. Oh, hang on. Ed always wants to say one more thing.
This is more personal because I think that we flossed over it in our absence in our presentation. I am a foster care for my tribe. My wife and I provided some 32 emergency foster care services during our time as foster parents. We raised 4 foster kids as our own. The first 2 were my mother's brother's stepdaughter's children. Seriously. But because of ICWA, I was able to claim them as my extended family. And so we raised these kids, and they were not taken out of our tribe. Now, a lot of you are looking at me going, who's that Swede standing up there? My mother passed away 5 years ago, and every day up to her day of her deathbed, and this is, you younger ones won't remember milkmen, but I looked a lot like the milkman. My point being, those kids would have been taken off the reservation and out of our community. To this day, all 4 of those children are doing exceptional, and their children are doing exceptional. And you got to take one step at a time. So when you read this nonsense about ICWA and how it's being bad to other people, trust me, there's another side to that story. If you take those children out of their community, if you take them out of the village and the people that will help them understand, as Levi is doing, take a kid maple camping, right? Take a kid deer hunting, take a kid wild ricing. If you take those kids out of that, if you take them away from their leaders, you take them away from your elders, they will not understand and they will rebel. The one thing that Native children have that we capitalize on is the need to survive and to be part of a community. And so I just want you to know that if we work together, you, this wonderful body, and with our elected leadership, we can do much better than we are right now for our children. Thank you.
So thanks. So I do want to thank Alan Roy and the whole panel. So thank you. Now, are we done? Okay, thank you. Ed says we're done.
So before we start the tribal panel, which will be on the page bench in the front, we'll have all the tribal leaders come back up. We have a house photographer in the balcony. We'll do a quick picture. And then we will have the tribal leaders on the page bench in the front, and then Representative Dean Urdahl and Representative Kunesh-Podein, who are both the appointees to the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, will moderate the panel. So if I could have the tribal leaders up here for a quick picture. Thank you. Up in the balcony. Wave your arms, Andrew. There he goes. And he wants us to condense.
Look at him, he's saying up to the camera. Look at him, he's waving right up there.
In the middle balcony.
Right up there, see?
All right, great. All right, there's great acoustics, so if folks want to sit on the bench in the front,
Gotcha.
then Representative Urdahl. Yeah,
had to try that.
So do you?
Is it on now? Oh, yes. You like it when I have it off, don't you? I'm Representative Dean Urdahl. Been on the Indian Affairs Council for 4 years, and there's been a lot of learning here today. And for those of you who maybe have other questions that you won't be able to get answers to today, I urge you, well, you guys could always contact them. You might want to do a little bit of reading. And through a consultation with Mr. Johnson, I have some books that you may be interested in. Well, come on now. The Rights of Indian Leaders by Stephen Pavar. Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask by Anton Troyer. Through Dakota Eyes by Clayton Anderson. Over the Earth I Come, The Great Sioux Uprising of 1862 by Dwayne Schultz. And there's another book called Uprising by my favorite author. Representative Kunesh-Podein.
Thank you, Representative Urdahl, and thank you, members, for spending this really, truly historic day here in the capital of Minnesota. For those of you who don't know me, I am a descendant of the Lakota Sioux from Standing Rock. My grandfather was born out on Standing Rock Reservation, and his mother brought him here as a young man. The history that you heard today is the history of my family. When my grandfather was a young boy, his two brothers were taken from the family and sent to Carlisle. They were not allowed to return until his one brother fell off the train that they were running away on and had his leg cut off. And then they let him go home. They let the boys go home. He grew up, that young man who lost his leg, was at Carlisle with a young woman named Josephine Gates Kelly. She was my great aunt. She was the first Standing Rock descendant or member to graduate from Carlisle boarding school, but she was also the first and only woman chair of the Standing Rock tribe. And so I am proud to be here today. That woman traveled back and forth between Washington, D.C., often hitchhiking and begging a place to stay in order to advocate on behalf of her people. And I'm not going to lie when I say that one of the reasons I ran to become representative of my county or my district was also to be a representative of the Indigenous people of Minnesota and of all Indigenous people. And so I'm very proud to be here today. I'm glad you are all listening. I hope it opened up your hearts and your ears and your thoughts to what needs to be done together, collaboratively, because we are a one Minnesota. And it's really time that we look at how we can go back and make it one once again. And so right now what we're going to do is we're going to ask each one of our leaders here to once again stand up, introduce yourself, and maybe if you would share one or two of your takeaways from today. Maybe it's something that you think you might want to do in collaboration with your legislators in your own district or as a state, or just one or two thoughts of how you felt this event went here today. So let's start right here.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith Anderson, and I'm Vice Chairman of the Shakopee Medewa Katua Dakota Oyate, which is Shakopee Metawakan and Sioux community, formerly on the books. My take for today, and I apologize, I wasn't here earlier, but I got in on a lot of the broadcast and a lot of the information that was talked about. I'm not unfamiliar with any of the subjects that were brought up today. I see a respectful allegiance of recognition. I don't know how many times I've spoken to people who live less than 5 miles from us and have never gone by our or have no idea how we got there. And I think this formal recognition and respect would be something that I hope for. Actually, another thing I hope for too is that anything that has to do with our children and anything in education that can get our children to a level to compete on a scholastic level, which would greatly uplift a lot of this generational trauma that we're all slowly piecing together and getting over with. So thank you for listening and allowing me to be here. Thank you.
Pass it down to the next.
Oh, just pass on.
Amitakapia. Again, my name is Kevin Jensvold of the Yellow Medicine Band, the Dakota people, federal Indian name, Upper Sioux community. I want to apologize to my Vice Chairwoman, Marissa Anawash, my Councilwoman, Sharon Pazizi, my Secretary, Tremaine Blue, who are here with me today. I didn't acknowledge them this morning. I apologize to them, as well as Councilwoman Pazizi's son, Drew Brockman, who brought in our tribal flag, served 2 tours of combat in Iraq, and I want to acknowledge them in front of all of you as decision makers and Akichita of our people. Like I said this morning, the difficulty that this day presented for me is still there. My mother told me one time, don't ever leave anything unsaid, so I'm going to offer one more observation that is troublesome. I didn't notice, but there's a seal of Minnesota in that flag that represents the state of Minnesota. I don't know how many of you notice what it depicts, but to my people it could be construed, and to myself maybe I have too much time to think. But it shows a European plowing the land, and the gun that he has near him is pointed directly at the Indian who's riding off into a sunset. You look at that situation there, and all that shows is mistrust. It shows a line that was cut into the land that says, this is now mine, and what used to be yours no longer exists. The only reason I bring this up is I talk a lot, and you obviously know that by now here, but I talk a lot in schools. And I went to this school, and they were talking about bullying and racism and this and that. And they asked me about our flag. If you look at most of the native flags here, they all have some component of a sacred medicine wheel. And that medicine wheel consists of the 4 colors of the 4 races of the people that live on Mother Earth. So I told those young people, I says, look at this flag. It shows that all of us should be included, that together we make this circle complete. I said, and then take a look at the flag that represents my state, and you can see the line and the distrust and the violent history that it represented. I just ask you to take a look at that, because it doesn't trouble just me as one tribal member, but there are young people who wonder why it has to be that way. A young lady here asked about, or excuse me, this young gentleman from Cantrell, I believe, talked about what we can and cannot do to change today or yesterday's and this and that. Nothing we can do. History just sits there. It is what it is. No matter how we came to this day, we can only look forward to a future for our children. And if this day brings some good for that, then I'm honored that you've entertained me today. You've fed me. You've shown me hospitality of my people. So I say, Mitakiwasi, thank you so much.
I learned today that I should sit on that end of the table so I can gather my thoughts. I'm Chairman Charlie Vague from the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux community. I think Kevin said a lot of what I wanted to say about coming full circle. Our people have suffered. I think a lot of it has to do because of decisions being made without consultation. I think today there's a start of something where hopefully we'll be asked more of how we would solve the problem. I just, that's what I got out of it. I think talk to us. I was telling somebody the other day about our police chief called me, which is a wonderful thing because that shows we're building a relationship with our county and our police, or it wasn't our police chief, I'm sorry, it's our sheriff. And he asked me how I felt about the pipeline up north for the northern Native Americans. And my answer has always been this, we support whatever them tribes are supporting. We want to be with them. They're the ones living through the issue, not me. I'm not living through that pipeline issue right where I'm at. But I thanked him for calling because that's a step showing me that we're building a relationship, and we're building relationships all the time to help everybody understand who we are and the struggles that we have. So thank you for letting us be here today.
Hi, I'm Shelley Buck, president of the Prairie Island Indian Community Tribal Council. I don't think today really does a good justice of what we all have to offer. This is just the tip of the iceberg. One thing you all need to remember is each tribe is different. We're all separate sovereign nations. We all have our own form of government, our own constitution, our own ordinances, policies, everything. So a lot of things that may pertain and be one way for me and our tribe is not the same for the other Dakota tribes or even the Ojibwe tribes. So just because one tribe says one thing doesn't mean it's the same for everybody. And when I go to the schools, that's what I always say. Our history is an oral history. So if I were to start a sentence up here, by the time it made it back to the end of the room, it will have changed slightly to a lot. So there's a lot of differences within tribes, and I think you need to remember that. And I mean no disrespect by anything I say here, so please, no one, including you guys up here, take that this way. But you also have to remember that there are Dakota tribes in this state. We are standing on Dakota property. This is Dakota land, my ancestral homeland. So I love that you say Buju. I love that you say Miigwech, but you also have to remember this is Dakota land. Therefore, for men, it would be how or ho. For women, it's ha. Say thank you is padamaya. That's if you're going to do one, you need to do especially the one of the land that you're here on. I think to get the real meaning of who we are as people would take much longer than just one day. A good way to do it would be to have a day of Dakota and a day of Ojibwe, and then have each individual tribe talk to you on their own, because some of the answers that you've heard from some of the other tribes or some of the other questions, the answers you heard from the questions, is different for us. Blood quantum means different to us. We don't have blood quantum in our tribe. We're a lineal descendancy tribe. The TIPO, we have TIPO. We can answer what our TIPO does. A lot's been talked about with the 23. Well, before 23 was 101 project. The 101 project destroyed 7 of 9 burial mounds of my people that sat out in the rain and in the snow and in all that weather for 4 years before they were repatriated. So each tribe has their own stories to tell and their own issues that we deal with here at the state level and the federal level. And I think to hear from each of us individually would be so much more helpful for you, and you'd learn a lot more. This is a good start, but I hope this is just a start. Padama Yayepi.
Haumitakiapi. Robert Larson from the Lower Sioux Indian community in Minnesota. I don't know what else to say. We've got all ends of the spectrum you've covered already. But this was, for me, I didn't know what was going to happen today. So I'm more interested in what you all are taking away from today than what I am. That's what this was for me, to try to share. I don't want to say educate, but to share who we are so you know better who you're dealing with. I can gladly say that we've got a great relationship with our representative, Torkelson. We appreciate that very much. I think for me, the biggest thing is we all came together today. We worked together the best we can. Like Shelley said, this is Dakota territory. We appreciate that. But everyone is different as much as we are related, and similarities that we all have. We are individual nations. We have our own, some things are shared, some things are individualized. So I hope you take that away. Our Hakatawa relatives to the north, appreciate you all driving down also. And say Pidamia.
Buju bimoseganu indijnakas makwandu dem miskwagawizaganeng. Again, my name is Sam Strong. I'm Secretary of the Red Lake Nation, and Padamae for hosting us here on Dakota land. And I have to give you guys a little bit more of a history lesson. I heard the question about why is Red Lake different? So I'll give you a real quick lesson as to why I see us as different. So Red Lake is in northern Minnesota, and if you know anything about geography, the Continental Divide occurs right near the Red Lake, the actual Red Lake. It's about 7 miles south of Red Lake. So everything 7 miles south flows into the Mississippi River Basin. Everything to the north flows into the Hudson Bay. And so essentially the best way to look at it is we're at the top of the mountain. We're at the very middle of the continent. And so what ended up happening was through all these different acts that occurred, through all these broken treaties, we saw all the nations being taken advantage of. We saw the land being taken. You know, I did some research when I was younger, some historical research. I went to some of the archives, and some of the stories of how land was taken is incredibly preposterous, to say the least. There's instances where they're selling land for tokens that can only be redeemed at liquor stores, right? They're taking this Dead and Down Timber Act. So they were allowed to go in and harvest this timber as long as it was on the ground. So they went through and they downed all the trees. They burned the forests to take advantage of Native American tribes. And we saw all this. And the great thing about the Ojibwe Nation is that we were one of the largest land-based nations in the entire country. And so we had connections not only with America, but also with the French, with lawyers, and ultimately we saw what was happening. And so when we started engaging the federal government on the Allotment Act, we decided that we were going to stay away from allotment. And we not only fought that, but we had to fight for 13 years. So in 1889 was the agreement. Well, we had to fight until 1902 and 1903. We had lawyers representing us, and we worked within the laws of the United States. We worked within the confines of the system, and eventually we were granted sovereign status, the status of being a closed reservation. And for us, that's very unique. We're the only group that didn't cede control of their entire territory under that act. And so there's one other tribe that's a closed reservation. It's Warm Springs in Oregon, and they were given that through congressional action. And so, in fact, Red Lake is the only closed reservation that holds that distinction. And the reason being is that we were geographically located to where we saw what was happening to all these other tribes. We saw how they were taken advantage of, and we worked with the laws of the system. And so that kind of goes into what I want to say here. That's what we're here to do, is to work within the laws of the United States, to work within the laws of Minnesota. And part of that is recognizing the treaties. Part of that is recognizing the humanitarian crisis that is occurring in Red Lake. You know, I was thinking a little bit about what I wanted to say, and I was at a meeting a couple days ago. We started this youth coalition, and we're talking to the schools and to the Boys and Girls Club about what's going on in the homes. We have a large number of kids that are only eating in schools and at the Boys and Girls Club. This isn't America. This isn't a third world country. This is in the heart of America. We have kids that don't have access to running water and electricity. We have kids that are faced with deplorable conditions in their homes. We have a huge crisis when it comes to foster care. The opioid epidemic has hit our reservation hard. Historical trauma has created for a void in our people, and we're trying to fill it with our culture and identity. But we also need your help. You know, we've passed a bonding bill that helped us expand our school, and for that I say miigwech. But we've also asked for other help, for social services and other buildings to help us serve these humanitarian needs that our people have. And during some of the breaks, I talked to some people, and they're going to come up to Red Lake, and they're going to take me up on my offer of inviting you guys to Red Lake. And I want to, again, extend that offer. And that's what I think can really change the mentality is come up to Red Lake and see the good things, but also see the crisis that we're dealing with. And when you see those kids that are struggling, that did no wrong to any person, and you see the struggle that they're in, you'll see that it's the right thing to do to put these resources towards these kids. It's the right thing to do, not only legally, because we're bound by these treaties, but also because it's the right thing to do as a human being, because these kids deserve better. And so if anything can be communicated to the group here, it's that we need your help. And together, we really can make a difference. We can change a generation of kids and provide a better outcome for their futures. And so with that, I say miigwech and padamiye.
Oh, miigwech. I'm Alan Roy, White Earth Nation, Secretary Treasurer. What I've learned today is that we've come a long ways. We have come a long ways. I think this is a turning point in Minnesota's history. Certainly it's a turning point for us tribes and our tribal leaders to be sitting in these chambers and speaking to the good representatives of the state. I'd also like to acknowledge, because I forgot to do it at the beginning when I introduced myself earlier, is that we do have another representative here, Representative Aganash. He's here. Chairman Tibbetts was unable to make it today, but I do want to send out an acknowledgement to him. Also our Kathy Goodwin and Eugene Tibbetts, who are also on the Tribal Council. Also in this room, what I've also learned is that we have, White Earth has a lot of members all over the state. We actually have one that's actually a representative here, Representative Green. He's a member of White Earth. Peggy Flanagan is a member of White Earth. Ann McCaig is a descendant of White Earth. She's on the Supreme Court. And so what we've learned is that tribal people are everywhere. We're everywhere, and we've learned over time, certainly what I've learned by serving on tribal council and in the military, is that if you want to make a difference, you start with a discussion. You start from a good place, you start with openness, and you start with diplomacy. And that's what I see here today. You know, it's about consultation, coordination, and cooperation. And I see that in this room, and I hope to carry it forward. Miigwech.
Kathy Chavers, Tribal Chair, Boys Fort Band. I like what Alan and all my fellow tribal leaders had to say here. this afternoon. And one thing that I've learned here today is that this is a historic event, and I hope it's a first of many meetings that we will have together as, maybe not us as tribal leaders, but other tribal leaders and educators that can come together so we can understand each other and you can understand where we're coming from. I've had the opportunity to sit on advisory boards for the governor, the Young Women's Initiative, and the Results First Advisory Task Force. And I guess what I would like to say to you guys here today is please include tribes in everything that you think about or discuss. You include counties, you include the state offices. Don't forget about the tribes. When I sat on the Results First Advisory Committee, it was midway through the stream of that committee. And I came in on the child welfare program. And Minnesota has the highest number of children in out-of-home placement, Native American children in out-of-home placement. And the Indian Child Welfare Act was adopted in 1978, and we're still the highest out-of-home placement for Indian children. That's many years that law has been enacted, but it hasn't been adhered to. When I sat on the committee for the Results First on these numbers they were giving, I asked them, I said, have you asked about tribal data? And they said, no. And the tribes keep our own data. We have our own tribal courts. We have our own social systems. We have our own data. And that even proved true with the Wild Rice Task Force. We keep our own data. We have our own programs and services, but they're not included in your numbers when you get some data. It may say Native American, but it might be off-reservation Native American. It might not be on-reservation Native American. So please, when you're thinking about making decisions on programs and services, please think of tribes the same as you would any county or any other agency, because we've been forgotten for a long time. And now today, I think, is the start of a first time that you can actually say, oh, let's not forget about the tribes. They were here today. We got a little education on them, and we need to include them. When you talked about reporting, some of the Results First Committee wanted evidence-based reporting. Tribes don't do evidence-based reporting. We don't have those resources. Some of us do, some of us don't. I'm from a smaller tribe, and our staffing, we wear many, many hats. We do not have the staffing capacities. We have great relationship with our county for law enforcement and social services and those types of services, but we do things differently. An example is if a non-Indian social worker goes into a Native home and she sees that it's somewhat messy or dirty, she may remove that child. That's how some of us live. We don't have the picket white fence and the clean houses like everybody else does. We have multiple family members living with us. We have extended family. We have cousins and aunts and uncles living with us. We have 5 to 7 family members in a household. We live differently. We do things differently. And so please understand that. But just remember, please include the tribes. Miigwech, I'm very honored to be before you, and thank you all for coming today.
Good afternoon. Melanie Benjamin, Tribal Chair of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. And through our band statutes, I am referred to as the Chief Executive. And one of the things, my takeaway, I believe, is from McDonald when he talked about his 18-year-old going to Shakopee to gamble. And that's kind of what we really know about tribes, is the gambling. And I look at our history, I look at our education system, and I think there's nothing in there really about the Ojibwe or the Dakota tribes in our everyday educational system. And we might have Indian Month, so you might learn a little bit about that. And so one of the things I was thinking about, and Intercontinental is owned by the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and so the Explore Minnesota had a conference there where they opened up Find Your True North. And if you look at that, where are the tribes in that whole discussion? And we have a lot to offer. We have a rich history. We have, if you go through the state of Minnesota, a lot of the towns and cities are named by Dakota or Ojibwe. but yet our children don't know too much about that. So my solution to that is that there's a group of us that is working on, it's an organization called NATOM, Native American Tourism. And we know if the international visitors love American Indians, and they would love to experience and what goes on reservations. And so I've been working on that for the last couple of years, haven't been doing too much of it, and talked to Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith about it a while back and things of that sort. But when I look at that, that's one way that we can change the perspective here in the state of Minnesota with our tourism, and proposal with the Legacy Fund to assist us with that. Wisconsin has some beautiful documents, and all the tribes are involved in their tourism. And so I think that's one way we can do that and get some education for our citizens and visitors, and I think our visitors would bring a lot of economic development to the reservations and to the state of Minnesota. But then when I think about that, if we do invite people to our reservations, we want them to be safe. Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe had a law enforcement joint powers agreement with Mille Lacs County. We did that in 1991. A couple of years ago, they decided we're done with that. They ended it. So for 2 years, we didn't have an agreement with Mille Lacs County law enforcement. And what that turned out to be is that they decided that our federally trained, our highly trained law enforcement officers, we had 32 at the time that patrolled the northern end of Mille Lacs County, that they were going to arrest them if they tried to be law enforcement officers. And so we asked the state for help. We asked the Attorney General for help. We didn't get it. And what happened is Secretary of Interior showed up on the reservation, and with that, he brought support of the BIA officers. So for 2 years, we had no law enforcement agreement, and which sent the message out to gang members, drug dealers, that Mille Lacs was a police-free zone. And so we had a lot of people that started to get addicted to the opioids. We had a lot of children going to out-of-home placement. It just raised havoc on the reservation, and a lot of negative things that came about. And just a couple of months ago, that we did get a new agreement with Mille Lacs County, so hopefully now we have many years of negativity associated with no law enforcement to correct. And we can't have that happen again. We can't ever have that happen to any of the other tribes. And sometimes if it happens to one tribe, it happens to another. And the one thing I wanted to end with is that partnerships with the tribes. We bring a lot to the table. Not only our rich history and all of the great things we have on the reservations, but we also have federal partnerships. Like the Mille Lacs County with the little city of Garrison, we wanted to do a wastewater treatment fund. Again, Mille Lacs County fought us on that, and it was a couple of years of just running water through our system because we were in the courts in a legal fight over that. But under that arrangement, we brought in $21 million of federal money to help us in that, improving the lake. So that's just an example of how because we have that relationship at the federal level, at the state level, and the tribal funding, if we can work together on a lot of these projects, I think there's a lot of good things that can happen through the state of Minnesota with tribes and the state. And I want to say thank you for having this day. I think it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to address you, and also hopefully the presentation, which I can sit and listen to that on many occasions, and I really enjoy Tad and Rebecca and the others, and it's a good education, and I hope we have much more long-term relationships with all of you. Miigwech.
Thank you again. I'm Marie Spry. I'm the Vice Chair at Grand Portage Tribal Council, and now I'm the interim chair until we have our next election. I shouldn't be here today. Norman should be here, and that's what I keep thinking about, and I keep listening to everybody and what you have to say, and I think it's great the way they can talk and do this. I've got a lot to learn. I'm here, though, and I'm really honored to be here, and I'm glad, and I'm just not going to say too much because I might cry. Anyway, thank you so much for having me.
Into the cord there, pull it out. But Anine, my name is Farron Jackson Sr., tribal chairman for Leech Lake. My Ojibwe name is Giwadin, which was my dad's name, and that means north wind. I'm from Leech Lake. I live in the village of Onigum. You know, we used to call where we stayed a village. We never really called it a community, and Onigum means the village across the water. We're directly across from Walker. But I'm happy to be here today and participate in this historical meeting. You know, there's a lot of knowledgeable people in this room. You know, a lot of things that we discussed and we share in common. You know, we don't really think at least I don't think in a square box. I kind of look at our life as a circle of our lifestyles. You know, and we never exclude anybody in our circle. You know, and when you refer to people of color, I kind of have a little issue with that because I think we all have a specific pigmented skin color. So nobody's excluded from people of color. Just wanted to make that point this morning here as well. You know, elders used to talk with us a lot. You know, we lose a lot of elders on our reservation. You know, we still have the highest mortality rate of any race, I believe, in the world. You know, and a lot of the elders would come to us and they talk with us and they would share the language with us. You know, a lot of it we retained. A lot of their language was stripped from them, like we talked about earlier through the boarding school era. But there's a special word that the elders used to share. And this word is minno dogwood. And my elder used to say that to me a lot when we would go out and do things, whether we'd go out and we'd go hunting, or we'd go out and we would go ricing, or we would go out and we would go pick wild berries, or we'd take our families and we'd gather at a powwow, and he'd say that, minno dogwood. Finally, I asked him one time, I said, what does that really mean? You know, I don't understand. And he said, Farron, minno dogwood, it means it's a good thing today what we're doing. And I think that would apply here as well. You know, as we educate each other and we work to have a good working relationship. And it's not about pointing a finger or putting blame on anybody. You know, everybody has made mistakes. You know, everybody might have had a misjudgment at one type. I teach my grandchildren the history that I know. I have some great grandchildren that I'm blessed with. My wife is in the back of the room, Laurel. My wife, Laurel. Turtle Mountain. Her mother was from Turtle Mountain. Her father was a decent Norwegian man. Very respected musician from North Dakota. So I got a Norwegian in my family, and I'm proud of it. I don't discriminate, you know. And so you know, I think, like I said, you know, I mean, the more we educate and talk about these things, and we talk about them in a good way, you know, I try to look at things in a positive light, you know, and I know I never intend to disrespect anybody, because my dad wasn't that way. My father was very well respected. He had friends, native, non-natives, and neighbors, and he had so many friends, you know, that I wanted to be like that too. You know, and I worked down in Minneapolis here for XL Energy for 31 years before I retired. I had African Americans, Caucasians, Asians, Japanese. We all got along. We called ourselves the United Nation Brothers, is what we called ourselves at work, you know, and it was a good feeling. It's a good feeling when you run off positive energy. And I think we can get a lot more done if we can look at it that way, as our young kids are watching what we do. You know, in Cass County, Mr. Levi Brown, Leech Lake band member, we got together with Cass County where there was some racial issues that were there. we're working through them, and we got an MOU established, and we have meetings, and it's very productive, and there's good feelings in the room. We sit down and we eat together. When you break bread with people, it's like you become part of their family. You know, we share our wild rice. We share our walleyes. It's ours. It belongs to everybody. You know, it was a diet of our ancestors. We always have some concerns with how we treat our natural resources. You know, they're so important to all of us. You know, and you know, with the zebra mussels that are infiltrating here and there, now we got chronic waste disease. So we're concerned about that. You know, we're concerned about it. That's our diet. You know, that's why we're here today. Like our Dakota brothers with the buffalo, what significance the buffalo means to the people. It was their life. And that's what we talk about, you know, when we have ceremonies. Because we got to remember, you know, we're only here for a short time, so let's keep it positive and keep it real. You know, and that's what I see in this meeting today. Miigwech.
I don't have anything to say. Buju nagani musan dejna kaj nagachiwana njumba. I think my biggest thing is, I'll tell you a little story. It'll be short though. The first time I ever went to Washington, D.C., one of the first times to sit in front of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. We got there and we were supposed to send an agenda a week out. And when we sent the agenda out, we're supposed to tell them where we're located at, our resources, our population. So we get to the committee, and you got up there and there's a little clock, a little green light and a little red light. It said you have 5 minutes to talk. And during the time the Circle of Flight program was out there, dealing with the wild rice and our estuaries and our waterways and a dam system that we had on Fond du Lac. So we sat there, and before we got started, the chairman at the time said, this is the protocol that we have to do and go forward. So the chairman that I was with was Pete Defoe at the time, and I was the Secretary of Treasury. And the chairman put his hand on the agenda, and I asked, does anybody know where Fond du Lac is located at? And every one of them were pulling up their agenda because they never looked at it. They didn't look at it one time, except Senator Inouye and Senator Benigni Horst Campbell. So the point that was talked about here earlier resonates this principle. We're on our own land. We're on Lakota land today. But this continent belonged to us at one time, or we lived it, we inhabited it at one time, by ourselves. So we have to go to DC and ask for funding, which we're pretty much the only group of people in the United States in this manner. So we have to learn protocol, we have to learn respect, we have to learn their ways that is set in Washington, D.C. But at the time, nobody had to learn our ways. Nobody had to know where we lived, what part of Minnesota we came from, our population, or our concerns. And I think I can speak for everybody here. So every time we go to D.C. or state legislation-wise, it's a point of re-educating all the time. Re-educating on it. And the system will tell you, well, I'm new at it. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm new. The person can tell us to our face that they're new, but sit in a hearing and make a determination on us without our consent. So we look at things in a concern. Oh, by the way, the enrollment thing, Balcano, so it doesn't lose my... It started in Europe, and it was applied to the first colony between 17 and 1710. Had nothing to do with us. It started in Europe, so that transformation came all the way across that large body of water to here. I just had to throw that in so I didn't lose my train of thought. So it's a concern what we have, or I can speak for myself. And I'm glad today is where it is today. I can look out here and I can see some of you that I've known for many years, like that little elderly lady over in the back, who knows about Fond du Lac and knows about the good things that Fond du Lac has done. The way we were able to put a community and tribal college into place that everybody said that we couldn't do it. We looked outside of the box. The leadership that we had and the people who had a foresight to do it, the initiative and intuitive to do it, looked outside the box and did something a different way. And it's one of the best college, or not the best community college in the state of Minnesota right now. So we have one of the best law enforcement programs and one of the best nursing programs, and we're trying to expand it even more. But these are things that we do, and we do very well. I gotta ask everybody in the room, does everybody know who Adolf Hitler was? Raise your hands if you don't. Okay. Does everybody know who Dr. Mengele was? Okay. The stuff that was talked about earlier. There's a thing that happened in Minnesota called the Hinton Rolls. And probably most of you in this room don't know it because it's really not part of your history, it's part of our history. What they did was measured our feet and our craniums, just like the Germans did with the Jewish people. And they took a piece of metal, kind of like a paper clip, in your skin that was closest to the bone on your sternum, and they would scratch it. The more blood you bled, the more Indian blood you had in you. The less you bled, the less Indian blood you had in you. So the stuff that was talked about today, about how the land was taken away, in the many ways they figured out how to do it. If a non-Indian man was married to a Native woman, he had all ties to the land. He had all ties to the land. If a Native man was married to a non-Indian woman, she wouldn't have any ties to the land. The allotment process of 1887 and the Nelson Act of 1889, one of the principles behind it was blood quantum, per se. So if you wanted 80 acres of land, you say you're 3/4. Because you had to be competent to own land. You had to be competent to own land. So our people didn't know the concept of owning land, but they knew that right in front of them, it's being taken away. So for some, it was a survival mechanism, that I need land. I can't provide for my family. So they put their X on there and their name, and a person who was a full-blood is now a half, because he or she got 240 acres of land, 240 acres lot. So we didn't start it, but these are the principles that are there. Most reservations on each one of the treaties disallowed spirits or alcohol. Correct? That's what the treaties say? Yes, that's what they say. So they would have Indian people transport the liquor for money onto the reservations. And if they got caught, what they ended up doing is signing away their land. We look at alcohol today as no big deal, but it was one of the things that was specifically written in the treaties, specifically. So when we sit and look at things and we talk about the things that we're taught in school, it's very, very limited. But if you go to the National Museum in Chicago, or the Mormon Church, believe it or not, or Smithsonian Institute, Library of Congress, that's how I learned. I came home from the Marine Corps in 1990, excuse me. I spent 8 years there. I got introduced to the 1854 Treaty and the Constitution of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, and I got hooked. And we would dig up money to get there, sit there, buy federal law books every year, every new volume, sit at somebody's house till 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and read in federal law. Had no idea what it meant, where it was going. But apparently there was a reason for it. So if I can do that, everybody else can do that. But it's time we really look at the history of one another. And when I say it in that manner, I mean it that laws, legislation that affect us when we're not part of it. Funding principles that come in and we're not in the stream of the funding. It's not direct funding, it goes to the state, and the state determines how much we get, which isn't fair. And we are a unique people. We have our land, our culture, our language, our identity. So with this, for me today, what I got from it, it's the start. It's start of something that should have happened a very, very long time ago. And as long as people can sit at the table and look each other in the eye, we can maintain that dialogue. We can overcome the things that hurt us before. Remember, our past is our past. We remember it to make sure it doesn't happen today, so we can secure the future of our people. That's not just us as Native people, that's everybody. That's everybody. So we start here. I believe it's the start of everything, and everybody moves forward. I'm willing to learn, and I hope everybody else is. Miigwech.
Well, we have about 6 minutes left, so we could try a lightning round question. So you get like 15 to 30 seconds to answer. Sure. And if you had one attainable, achievable goal for your tribe, what would it be?
Mr. Urdahl, or Representative, why don't you start down there?
He told me to start down there.
Oh.
I just talked for 5 minutes.
Well, this time, 15.
Could you ask the question again, please?
If you had one achievable, attainable goal that you could do in the future for your tribe, what would it be?
Total recognition of who they are as a people within their constitution, within our constitution, as recognition of who they are as Anishinaabe people, and to recognize that, and to ensure that the future of our people is bound to who they are in their way of life, and not a principle of anything other than that. Complete recognition of sovereignty.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I kind of, we talked about understanding one another. I think it's important that our communities that are adjacent to our reservations understand just what a sovereign tribe is all about. Just how it was established, where we can all have these sovereign 101 meetings in our communities, so people understand each other and their families. And what a sovereign tribe signifies. So, getting back to recognizing people for who they are, for who they are, what they what they represent in their families, and when not asking to be treated any differently than anybody else, but just to be recognized as a community person that lives in these communities, as our children go to these schools on the reservation and don't have to face ridicule from certain kids that might not understand, because like I said, with anger, when people act out in anger, it's a lot of times the decisions don't come out the way, the actions don't come out the way we like to see it. So just kind of a more, peaceful resolution in our communities.
I've got a lot of things that I would like to do for our people in Grand Portage. Lots of things. Anyway, one of the things we do not have on our reservation is foster care. So when something happens to the parents of a child, has to be taken away out of the community. That needs to change. There's just so many other things too. They're going, I can't think of them right now, but that one struck me when I heard about, well, somebody was talking about children getting taken out of their homes and things. I can't imagine what it was like when these kids were taken right out of their homes and put into a school and changed their whole being, their clothes, their speech, everything. So how horrible for them. I guess we're pretty lucky here, but yeah, that's one thing I would like. Thank you.
I mentioned this during my introduction this morning, and my mission and my goal is Bamadiziwin, which is the good life for my members, and that encompasses everything in life: safety, our language, our traditions, our educations, economic development, clean water, making that sure our children have a future, making sure that what we do today has a good, lasting impact for the next 7 generations. And everything I do, I keep that in mind, and that's what I really work hard for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Miigwech.
I would like the people of Bois Forte and the Bois Forte tribe as a whole to be self-sustaining through economic development, and also have our tribal members trained in workforce development so they're not dependent on government jobs through the reservation and can live and prosper off the reservation. And that's what I would like.
Miigwech. Well, I'd like to do this again next year, certainly. Really short and sweet. I think perhaps next year we could have maybe 15 minutes for each tribal leader to come up and present their legislative priorities. I'm a pragmatic person above all else. But in the spirit of cooperation, as I said before, I do have a specific ask. It's a tax issue. And in 2016, the tax bill had a provision to give a one-time payment of the following: $1 million to WIDER to reimburse the tribe for upfront cost of the human services transfer. I believe we're one of the only tribes in the state that does human services. $1 million from Monoman County Hospital, and $1 million to the Monoman County. It passed in the 2016 tax bill, but the governor did not sign the bill at the time, and the 3 entities request that this provision be placed in the 2019 tax bill. And like I said, we all work closely together up north, and in the spirit of cooperation, hope to see that in the tax bill. Miigwech.
As I spoke to earlier, I'd really like to see a bonding bill for our Health and Human Services building, as well as a resolution stating that the state recognizes the treaty rights of the 11 tribes, the failures of the past, to honor those treaties, and a commitment in the future to honoring those treaties and working with tribal nations on making the wrongs of the past right.
One thing for our community, just that we could work together. I mean, that's put all our differences aside and work together for each other. Like I said in the beginning with what we've adopted, when we work together, we all live well. And I think that would be something I would wish here also. I know there's divisions and whatever, but I looked around and see empty seats. Again, I have to say thank you to everyone that's here and stuck through the whole day. But those empty seats also make laws that affect us. Maybe they don't have natives in their areas, but if this wasn't important enough for them to be here, I hope you tell them, because they're not here to listen to us. So, thank you.
I'm a Dakota woman, so I'm hard-headed. I have a couple of asks. I ask that you respect and recognize our sovereignty as sovereign individual nations, and you see our tribal police officers as equals to every other police agency in the state, including the airport and transit police. our officers go through the exact same post-certified, post-board education and everything. They could work any agency in this state and do the same thing, but they can't on our land if we don't have that county agreement. That's not to say we won't. We have decent relationships with our county. We would continue those relationships and those MOUs with our areas. But that should not be a requirement in order for us to have our sovereignty and be able to use our sovereignty. The second quick ask would be that you help pass our net zero project, which would make us one of the first tribal nations to be net zero, equaling out all the emissions that we produce on the land currently. Padama Yayipi.
The one thing I'd ask, again, is for our kids to be able to have our language, and probably the bigger part, and with what I mean by that is going to school, you know, our kids have to take a language class. It should be allowed to be a Dakota language and not Spanish or whatever. And then also but the bigger piece, I guess, is for them to not have to fight for our existence or explain who we are, or why we're here. Because we spend a lot of energy with our local municipalities and counties and state and even federal, like somebody had said here, explaining to them or educating them. We shouldn't have to do that. So that's what I'd ask.
Well, I'm glad I don't have a watch, so I don't know when 30 seconds is up, but you put me on the spot there, Representative Urdahl, as far as priorities, but one of the things, I think, like I said this morning, about this knowledge that isn't out there, these things that are facts that aren't known, maybe that would compel this body of government to look at the curriculum that we have in the social studies classes. I know a couple years ago it was revised from a page and a half to maybe 7 pages, I believe, or so. And that was a step in the right direction. But to encompass the history of a people and the nations that live in this land, it doesn't do justice in that. So maybe that is something you could all do. And that way, when the governor leads a delegation to welcome back the Dakota people to Minnesota, he'll realize that he passed by 3 nations on his way over there, so he could take a picture at the border. It was a good gesture, and don't get me wrong, but they failed to acknowledge that there's some Dakota bands that, despite the bounties and the persecution, we never left our homeland of the Minnesota River Valley, that we've lived here 10,000 years and we'll live here 10,000 more. We'll be an asset to our community, to our land, and to all of our neighbors. So again, you change the knowledge that's out there and make for a better future for our children, that they don't have to wonder why. They'll know, and they'll be able to overcome those mistakes that have been made in the past. And that might be the one thing I could see. I've been here 14 years. Things move slowly in government, I know that, but if it's achievable, that it would have to start in this room to make that happen, to bring forth the knowledge we brought today, that you can move that forward to other races. Semidaki Api again.
Wopada, and Petu Ashte, Yahipikin Washte. I say thank you, and it is a good day, and we're happy that we're all here. And I would just like to add the word respect, and I think that sums up a lot of what we're talking about. I'd like to be able to keep, at the very minimum, what we have today, and look to maybe make that grow and search for new opportunities. And it looks like it's beginning. So, Padamia, Wopada.
Well, we want to thank all of you for being here and for your wise words and your good stories. You know, 2 years ago, I came to the legislature and joined 3 other Native American women to create the first ever Native American caucus. Susan Allen, who is now retired, our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, Representative Becker Finn, who never forgets to remind everybody and asks that so important question, have you conferred with the tribes? And she never forgets to ask that question, and I want you to keep that question in your minds. I would like to ask you to look through the legislation, look at the legislation through Indigenous lenses when we're making decisions about the environment, about education, about infrastructure, because like our culture says, we're not just looking at the now or the next generation, we're looking at 7 generations from now. Is our land going to be clean and free of polluting oils? Is our water going to be clean enough to drink? Are our land and airs going to be there for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren? And if I have one ask, and it's one thank you for all of you that have signed on to House File 70 to create the task force for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. That has been historic since the minute a white person stepped on this continent. And it continues. The sex trafficking, the horrors around the man camps that come with pipelines and programs like that. I just ask that you remember to think about the Indigenous people and how it affects not just our own constituents and our own communities, but also the people that have been here for so many generations. Thank you.
Let's thank our tribal leaders. Thank you, members, and thank you, guests. We will have a reception down in the Capitol Vault, which is on the tunnel level of the Capitol, following when we gavel out this session. Should take us just about 10 minutes to finish up our business for the day, and our guests can feel free to remain in the chamber or meet us down in the vault.